The Strait of Hormuz at 7:22 a.m. was 33 kilometers of contested geometry that the destroyer had been transiting for 41 minutes. The transit corridor, the internationally agreed shipping lane that kept eastbound and westbound commercial traffic separated, was the specific piece of ocean that the destroyer had been assigned to hold open by its physical presence in it. Freedom of navigation operations were not abstract legal exercises. They were the act of moving a warship through contested water at a specific speed on a specific heading. The moment the movement stopped, the moment the destroyer altered course or reduced speed in response to anything other than a legitimate navigational hazard, the principle was diminished by exactly the degree to which the movement had changed. At 7:22 a.m., the IRGCN made a calculation about navigational hazards. 4 contacts had appeared on the radar in the past 8 minutes. Not fast attack boats. Not a formation. 4 small, slow-moving contacts in the transit corridor ahead, bearing 053, distributed across the corridor at ranges between 1.1 and 2.4 nautical miles. Speed, approximately 2 to 3 knots each, consistent with drifting objects. Distribution, irregular, but spanning the corridor width from its southern boundary to its northern edge. They were wrong in a specific, legible way. Natural drift clustered debris together. These contacts were separated by 200 to 400 yards between each one, covering 1.2 nautical miles of corridor width. Placement produced that distribution. Natural drift did not. Bridge, CIC. 4 new small contacts ahead in the transit corridor. Bearing 053, distributed from 1.1 to 2.4 nautical miles. Speed 2 to 3 knots, consistent with drift. No AIS on any contact. Distribution spans the corridor width. Assessing as possible moored objects or slow-moving surface contacts. Classification pending sonar and FLIR assessment. At 7:24 a.m., the captain stepped onto the bridge. He looked at the contact picture for 20 seconds. 4 returns, slow drift, distributed across the corridor, no AIS, bearing 053. He noted the distribution, not clustered. Separated. The objects covered the full corridor width. He noted what he did not yet know, whether the objects were capable of damaging the destroyer. The size of the radar returns was consistent with objects in the 1 to 3 meter range. That range covered both objects that were operationally harmless and objects that were not. I have the con. CPA to nearest contact, 1.1 nautical miles. Time at current speed, approximately 4 minutes, 30 seconds. The IRGCN had prepared this calculation before the destroyer entered the strait. The operational logic, international maritime law, obligated any vessel to navigate safely, which meant avoiding known hazards. A hazard in the corridor was a hazard whether it was a naval mine or a buoy filled with sand, because the destroyer could not determine which it was from radar returns at distance. The obligation to avoid hazards created the obligation to stop or divert. The stop or diversion produced the documentation the IRGCN needed, a U.S. warship yielding the transit lane under pressure. The calculation exploited the gap between the appearance of a hazard and the confirmation of a hazard. At current transit speed, that gap was 4 minutes and 30 seconds. In that gap, the destroyer had to make a decision. The captain was in the gap. He had 4 minutes and 20 seconds. He stood at the center bridge window and looked at the transit corridor ahead. The corridor was the same turquoise and blue it had always been. The reef on the southern side, the deep water on the northern side, the specific visual that made the Strait of Hormuz unique among the world's contested waterways. That you could see the physical geography of the argument. You could see why the corridor mattered. You could see why a vessel that controlled the corridor controlled more than geography. He was not in a hurry. He understood the gap, and he understood what the gap required. He had done this arithmetic before, in different corridors. The specific interval between the appearance of a problem and the confirmation of its character was always the interval that determined what the problem actually cost. Panic cost more than the problem. Premature response cost more than the problem. Systematic, disciplined assessment within the available time produced the outcome the situation allowed. He had 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Assessment took less than 4 minutes when it was done correctly. He was not in a hurry. He was in a systematic sequence. CIC bridge. Get me the FLIR thermal assessment on all 4 contacts. Are any internally powered? Simultaneously, active sonar on the nearest contact. 1 pulse. Tell me what the hull return looks like. The FLIR operator reported within 45 seconds. Bridge CIC. FLIR on all 4 contacts. I am not reading any significant thermal signature consistent with internal combustion or electrical systems on any of the 4 contacts. All 4 contacts are reading at ambient water temperature. They are not internally powered. Not internally powered. Objects at ambient temperature. Cold. The sonar operator reported within 60 seconds. Bridge CIC. Active sonar return on the nearest contact. I have a clean single hull return, size consistent with 1 to 2 meter sphere or cylinder. Hull material return, consistent with metal, fiberglass, or hard polymer. I'm not reading any secondary returns consistent with internal mechanical components, metal chains, or anchor hardware. The object appears to be a simple surface float or buoy. No complexity in the acoustic return. No complexity in the acoustic return. A naval mine had internal components, a fuse assembly, a charge, an arming mechanism. The acoustic return from a mine was not the same as the return from a hollow sphere or solid buoy. This return was clean. Simple. CPA to nearest contact 0.9 nautical miles. Time 3 minutes 40 seconds. At 7:26 a.m., the Seahawk received authorization to launch aerial visual assessment of each object at minimum safe altitude 100 feet. Close enough to resolve the objects visually in the morning light and confirm what FLIR and sonar were already suggesting. The Seahawk launched at 7:26 a.m. and reached the nearest contact in approximately 90 seconds. Seahawk pilot report at 7:28 a.m. Bridge Seahawk. Visual on contact alpha. Contact is a cylindrical buoy. I estimate 1.2 to 1.5 meters diameter, orange and yellow coloring, no visible markings. Buoy appears to be inflated. Mooring line below the water line, consistent with a single light anchor. No visible electronics, no hardware beyond the mooring arrangement. Contact Bravo at 1.7 nautical miles, also a buoy, similar profile, red and white. Proceeding to Charlie and Delta. Seahawk pilot report at 7:29 a.m. Bridge Seahawk. Contacts Charlie and Delta confirmed as buoys, similar construction. All 4 contacts are buoys. I am not observing any features consistent with naval mining equipment on any of them. Commercial or maritime safety buoys. Holding position, continuing documentation. 4 buoys. Orange-yellow, red-white, commercial construction, mooring lines visible, no electronics, no hardware beyond mooring. FLIR, no thermal signature. Sonar, no internal complexity. Seahawk, visual confirmation. They were not mines. They were buoys placed in the transit corridor. At 7:29 a.m., Channel 16 opened from a contact that had been holding near the Qeshm Island radar shadow since before the watch began. English. United States warship transiting the Strait of Hormuz. You're approaching a navigational hazard zone established by the Islamic Republic of Iran Coast Guard in accordance with maritime safety protocols for protected waters. The objects ahead are navigation markers delineating a zone of restricted access. You are required to alter your course to avoid the restricted access zone. Failure to comply will result in enforcement action. Navigation markers. Restricted access zone. The broadcast arrived 2 minutes after the Seahawk's visual assessment of the first 2 buoys confirmed they were buoys. Someone monitoring the helicopter's aerial pass had seen the assessment in progress and had initiated the Channel 16 broadcast before it was complete. The broadcast was designed to appear in the encounter record before the assessment concluded. The captain did not respond on Channel 16. CPA to nearest buoy, 0.7 nautical miles. Time, 2 minutes 50 seconds. At 7:29 a.m., the first friction event arrived. The commercial traffic following in the destroyer's wake, 3 supertankers at intervals of 4 to 7 nautical miles, had detected the Channel 16 broadcast and responded as commercial masters responded to any hazard notification. The lead tanker reduced speed from 14 knots to 8 knots and was requesting clarification. The tanker master did not know whether the objects ahead were mines, navigation markers, or debris. He was protecting 300 meters of petroleum cargo with reasonable caution. The captain transmitted on Channel 16 to the commercial traffic. Vessels following in the transit corridor. This is a United States warship. We have conducted aerial, sonar, and thermal assessment of the objects in the corridor. The objects are inflated buoys. They are not navigational hazards. We are maintaining our transit course. Recommend you resume your standard transit speed and heading. The tanker acknowledged within 40 seconds and resumed 12 knots. The Channel 16 exchange would appear in the maritime safety record for this date, the U.S. assessment characterizing the objects as non-hazardous, alongside the IRGCN's claim that they were legitimate navigation markers. Both would be in the record. The assessment data accompanying one of them would also be in the record. At 7:30 a.m., the second friction event arrived in the radar picture. The contact holding near the Qeshm Island radar shadow, the source of the Channel 16 broadcast, began moving. It had been stationary for 93 minutes. At 7:30 a.m., it initiated movement at 28 knots on a heading toward the destroyer's position. Fast attack boat profile. Small, high speed, consistent with an IRGCN PayCap class platform. One fast attack contact. Approaching from the northeast at 28 knots. 93 minutes of waiting, ended by the Channel 16 broadcast, which meant it had been waiting for that moment, for the specific tactical condition when the destroyer was managing the buoy assessment and the commercial traffic simultaneously. The buoys had been the trigger. The fast attack contact had been the second layer of the operation. The destroyer had not stopped. The corridor was not congested. The specific condition the fast attack contact had been waiting 93 minutes for had not been produced. But the contact was moving anyway, its captain revising his trigger to the current moment. The destroyer was still approaching the buoy field, still the closest it would be to the objects, still the moment of maximum tactical complexity. CIC bridge. Fire control radar on the fast attack contact. Tracking mode, no illumination. CIWS passive tracking on fast attack. CPA to nearest buoy, 0.5 nautical miles. CPA to fast attack contact, 520 yards estimated, 6 minutes. The fire control radar emissions reached the fast attack contact within seconds of activation. Every threat detection system on that vessel that was capable of identifying fire control radar emissions was now receiving them. The message that fire control radar sent in a narrow water corridor was the same message it sent anywhere. You are inside a targeting solution. At 7:31 a.m., the destroyer reached the outer edge of the buoy field. The Gulf morning at 7:31 a.m. had the specific quality of the late spring Hormuz atmosphere. High humidity, low haze, the kind of visibility that made contacts visible but not sharp at distances beyond 3 nautical miles. The surface was calm, force 1 at most, a light easterly that produced ripples rather than swells, and made the corridor water look almost artificial in its flatness. In that flat, bright water, the 4 buoys were visible from the bridge without optical assistance. Colored shapes sitting low on the surface, catching the morning light, their mooring lines invisible below the waterline. The corridor ahead of them was empty for as far as the eye could follow. The transit corridor continued southwest toward the Gulf of Oman, unobstructed, exactly as an international transit corridor was supposed to look. Contact Alpha, orange-yellow, 1.2 to 1.5 meters, confirmed hollow commercial buoy, was at 400 yards off the starboard bow. The destroyer's track would take it within 130 yards of the buoy if the current heading was maintained. The captain maintained the current heading. The specific act of maintaining course through the buoy field was the encounter's central operative decision. Every prior assessment, the FLIR, the sonar, the Seahawk visual, had been preparation for this moment. The preparation had produced the conclusion that permitted the course to be maintained. Without the preparation, maintaining course was recklessness. With it, with 3 independent assessment methods in the encounter record, maintaining course was a documented, assessed, legally supportable exercise of freedom of navigation rights. The preparation was the operation. The course maintenance was the result. The helmsman was 24 years old. He had been at the wheel since 0600. He had held the transit course through 47 minutes of the strait before the contacts appeared, and he was holding it now, and the 4 orange, yellow, and red-white objects that had been on the radar for the past 8 minutes had been assessed and confirmed and classified, and the standing order was still the transit course. His hands were at 10 and 2. The objects had been buoys since before the FLIR confirmed they were buoys. The assessment had confirmed what the geometry had already suggested. His standing order was the transit course. Course held. The destroyer passed contact Alpha at 7:32 a.m. at 130 yards. The buoy was visible from the bridge, orange-yellow, bobbing slightly in the wake from the destroyer's passage at 14 knots. Through binoculars, a commercial buoy, inflated, simple construction, exactly as the Seahawk had described from above. A buoy. It had always been a buoy. Contact Bravo at 7:33 a.m. 185 yards. Charlie at 7:34 a.m. 220 yards. Delta at 7:35 a.m. 170 yards. Each passed off the beam and entered the wake. The transit corridor was clear ahead. Meanwhile, the fast attack contact had been revising. At 7:31 a.m., 90 seconds after the fire control radar activated, the fast attack contact reduced speed from 28 knots to 20 knots. At 7:33 a.m., a 2-degree bearing change to the east. CPA projection opened from 520 yards to 850 yards. By 7:35 a.m., when the destroyer had cleared the last buoy, the fast attack contact was at 2.8 nautical miles, heading northeast rather than toward the destroyer's position. The blink in this standoff was distributed across 3 minutes of fractional course and speed changes rather than a single identifiable moment. That was how the strait worked when the tactical condition an adversary had been waiting for was not produced. The adversary did not abandon. The adversary revised. The speed reduction from 28 knots to 20 knots and the 2-degree course change to the east, logged in the encounter record, were the blink. The Seahawk recovered to the flight deck at 7:38 a.m., having documented all 4 buoys from altitude and the fast attack contact's approach and withdrawal. The fire control radar entered standby mode when the fast attack contact opened to 3 nautical miles. The CIWS returned to passive surveillance. No one on the bridge spoke for a long moment. The sonar operator in the CIC completed the contact log entry. Simple hollow acoustic return, no internal mechanical complexity, classified as surface buoy post-assessment. He had been confident at the time. He had been confirmed correct by the Seahawk visual. The specific quality of satisfaction in being confirmed correct after making an assessment under time pressure was present in the CIC at 7:38 a.m., logged nowhere but felt. The assessment had taken 60 seconds. The contact had been at 0.9 nautical miles when the assessment began. 60 seconds of acoustic analysis delivered while the contact was 3 minutes away had produced the conclusion that permitted the course to be maintained. 60 seconds. He noted this in the contact log, not as a reflection, but as a fact that the log required. Classification time, method, confidence level, post-assessment confirmation. All within normal parameters. All within the time the situation allowed. The officer of the deck looked at the transit corridor ahead. Clear. He straightened his collar. It had not needed straightening. The helmsman unclenched his hands from the wheel slightly and then reclenched them at 10 and 2. He had held course through 4 objects at 130 to 220 yards passing distance. The objects had been buoys. His hands had not changed the course for any of them. The course had been maintained through an assessed assessment, not through recklessness. There was a difference. He understood the difference. In the CIC, the communications officer completed the encounter record for the Channel 16 Commercial Traffic Advisory. The lead supertanker's acknowledgement was logged at 7:44 a.m., 44 seconds after the U.S. destroyer's broadcast. The supertanker had resumed transit and would pass through the buoy field within the next 20 minutes without incident. Its master's maritime safety report, filed that evening in Fujairah, would note, U.S. Naval Vessel Broadcast Assessment of Buoys and Corridors Non-Hazardous. Resumed transit following confirmation. A sentence in a routine maritime safety report. A sentence that, alongside the encounter record the U.S. destroyer was preparing for Fifth Fleet, constituted the public record of what had happened in the Strait of Hormuz at 7:22 a.m. 2 accounts, both in the archive, both available to anyone who wanted to understand what had occurred. The captain walked to the chart table. The encounter report would go to 5th Fleet, to the U.S. Embassy Bahrain, and to the Maritime Safety Authority governing the Strait of Hormuz. The report included the FLIR data, the Sonar acoustic return data, the Seahawk visual documentation, the Channel 16 transcripts including the IRGCN's restricted access zone claim, the commercial traffic advisory, and the fast attack contact track with fire control radar activation. Full encounter report to 5th Fleet. Include all assessment data and the IRGCN Channel 16 broadcast timing relative to the Seahawk assessment pass. That timing is relevant. He paused. Seahawk crew, outstanding work. That aerial assessment closed this out. He looked at the chart. The transit corridor continued southwest toward the Gulf of Oman. Continue the transit. The record assembled here speaks in the language the ocean keeps. 4 inflated surface buoys were placed by IRGCN, associated assets, in the Strait of Hormuz International Transit Corridor, ahead of a U.S. destroyer at 7:22 a.m. Distribution across the corridor width that ranges between 1.1 and 2.4 nautical miles. Formation consistent with deliberate placement. FLIR assessment, no internal thermal signature on any contact. Sonar assessment, simple hollow acoustic return, no internal mechanical complexity. Seahawk aerial visual, all 4 contacts confirmed as inflated commercial construction buoys, no electronics, no mining hardware. Channel 16, broadcast from IRGCN, claiming objects as navigation markers in restricted access zone. Transmitted at 7:29 a.m., 2 minutes after Seahawk visual assessment of first 2 contacts began. U.S. destroyer response to IRGCN on Channel 16, 0. Commercial traffic advisory by U.S. destroyer, yes at 7:30 a.m. Supertanker acknowledged and resumed transit. Fast attack contact emerged from Qeshm Island radar shadow at 7:30 a.m. after 93-minute hold. Maximum speed 28 knots. Speed reduction following fire control radar activation to 20 knots within 90 seconds. Course change 2 degrees east. CPA at maximum approach, 520 yards projected, opening to 850 yards. Fire control radar activated on fast attack, yes. CIWS passive tracking, yes. Weapons authorized, no. Weapons released, no. Minimum passing distance from nearest buoy during transit, 130 yards. Total buoys transited, 4. Course alterations in response to IRGCN buoy placement, 0. Speed reductions, 0. Transit completed without interruption, yes. The gap between the appearance of a hazard and the confirmation of a hazard was 4 minutes and 30 seconds at standard transit speed. FLIR, sonar, and aerial visual assessment closed that gap in 4 minutes and 22 seconds. 8 seconds to spare. The transit continued.